Oh.
Game face.
Oh, welcome, folks. I'm obviously a little punchy today, and but luckily we have Rod, who is very straight faced. He's got the game face on, ready for this. Um, Welcome to Liberation Lighthouse. We have a name, and we're using it.
For better or worse, we're using it.
For better or worse, we're using it. Um, The show today is to go into whether you or somebody you know, like if you're experiencing some type of trauma, possibly PTSD, other things that can lead towards depressive thoughts, suicidal ideation. Don't know why I chuckled on that. That's really awkward. um, like, what are the signs? Like, how do you even know? And it sounds like a strange question to ask, which we'll get into a little further on. But the truth is, for me, um, I know for Rod, there were periods of time where you either didn't know, didn't want to know, or didn't want to identify it. And so we're going to go into like what are the signs for that. And if you have somebody in your life that you care about, that you're curious or wondering what they might be going through, well, this episode can help you out as well. Um, yeah. I think that's it for the intro. Right now, we would typically have intro music. So, like, imagine incredible. Yeah, yeah. A brown chicken, brown cow. Brown chicken, brown cow.
Brown chicken, brown cow.
Well, that's our intro music. So, one of the we were really going over this, like what makes up like when you have some type of emotional hurt, right? Emotional hurt, i.e., trauma, and it can be everything from a little trauma all the way up to like the big guys, PTSD, everything there. What are some of the things that prevent us from seeing it, feeling it, admitting it, right? I think especially I can talk about this, Rod can talk about this from a man's perspective. Um, I know when we were talking about this, Rod, like we went a bit into thinking about like the external factors, like what are the things that surround somebody's life that makes it a challenge to do this. And one of the things that we came up with was family, right?
Sure.
Um,
Yeah. I guess it depends on your upbringing, and I know everybody's upbringing is just a little bit different. Some of us had trauma within our upbringing, and some of us faced trauma once we left home. But having grown up in a Hispanic household, um, there's always this notion of boys don't cry. You got to be strong. You got to be the man of the house. Man up. All these terms kind of come up, and I know it's not just isolated to the Hispanic culture. There's plenty of other cultures out there that I guess I have this vision of like the Marlboro Man. It's kind of like you got to be this stoic,
yeah.
strong, doesn't flinch, manly type man, and admitting to um, some of the stuff that you're going through, whether it's perceived like that to other people, the inner perception is, uh, I won't be perceived as manly, or this isn't what big
Isn't what a
boys
man does,
do.
right?
I'm not, I need to man up. I just need to suck it up and do it. I need to
Yeah.
walk it off. If you have that football background, you walk it off.
Get up,
That
walk it off. I remember that from coaches for sure.
lots of coaches along the way. It's like walk it off. Like I got
Yeah.
a broken leg. I think it's in like 5 pieces. Walk it off. So yeah.
It's funny as you share that, and we didn't talk about this one before, but what came up for me almost immediately, man, was like media and movies,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Like I think of our generation, and there's a whole bunch of generations, but action movies have been a staple throughout, right? And I think of Die Hard, I
Die
think of
Hard.
Rambo, Commando, i.e., or Conan the Barbarian, like Schwarzenegger, right? But there
Yeah.
were all these like greater than life men who like nothing got them down. Rambo's sitting there like hanging with leeches on him, being tortured. And
Fatal
what does he
wound
do?
going through his gut, and he just pours gunpowder in there and lights it on fire. Just
Yeah.
like, come on.
And those are the things we idolize. I mean, some of them got a little further into like the challenge in coming home, like say like the first Rambo, right?
Yeah.
Like goes a little further into that. But for most of them, again, like it's glorifying the fact that it's you're strong, you're enduring anything, nothing can get to you, and then you get the woman, and life is perfect, right?
Yeah.
Like
But
none of them is like what happens when
that,
you
that,
would have a relationship and you need to be open and vulnerable and care. And like it's like
but not
nothing.
just that. Nobody talks about coming home and having a bad dream and choking your girlfriend in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
I've got buddies that have admitted to that, and I'm just
Yeah.
like, well, holy shit, dude. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's not glorified.
Well,
Nobody talks about that.
a
Just
mentor of mine. So like the when thinking about like both family and everything else, right? Is um, like my family has been massively military. Grandfather, Air Force firefighter, and really his stuff mostly in the firefighter arena. Though I never really sensed a lot of trauma for him. Um, but my stepfather, tons of it, but especially from just growing up and being like beaten as a kid, and then later on some stuff that happened in the military. Think of my mentor and being in Vietnam and some of the stuff that he shared with me, like absolutely. And I do remember hearing this once, um, like it was uh, from his wife, I believe. I can't remember if it was his last wife or the wife before then, but it was like not waking him up in the middle of the night. Right? You don't wake him up when he's sleeping
no.
because you don't know the response that he's going to have.
Yeah, no,
Right?
I remember learning that in the late 70s and 80s, police officers were trained not to uh, wake up sleeping homeless people because there was a possibility that they were a Vietnam vet, and
Oh,
you had to be careful with that because you didn't know where these people had been and where they were coming from.
mm,
And it got to the point where it could have been a danger to the officers trying to respond, um, and yet here's an entire group of people that we just kind of swept under the rug you
yeah,
know um,
yeah.
my family members included. I have a couple of family members that went through Vietnam, and I'll tell you right now, I didn't know it growing up, but now that I see it, it's kind of like, oh yeah, they were seriously messed up.
It
you know
becomes obvious, right? And
yeah,
the
it
same
becomes
thing. Like I
obvious.
didn't understand. And I didn't have the empathy and the compassion for my father and what he had gone through.
Yeah.
All I could realize was hurt, but I didn't understand it. And now you can look back so clearly and understand the patterns.
Yeah.
Uh, our
It,
friend Josh just asked, why do you think that the macho man, tough guy persona has managed to hang around, especially in today's woke environment?
Look here, brother. Macho Man Randy Savage. That's what I think about when I hear macho.
Yeah,
Um, why has it survived? Because we perpetuated it.
yeah.
Um, for better or worse, we hold on to little things of the past. We are slowly letting go, but it's still perpetuated. It's still maybe not quite as loud as it used to be, but it's still there. And we brought it with us. We haven't let it go. That's what I think.
I think I feel like another like part of it as well, right? Like um, there was a flavor of it. It's funny. I've gone back to see some stuff from like dirty Harry movies
Yeah,
and stuff that came out like in the 70s, right? And there was a certain personification of manhood. And I think that some of that was a bit of a backlash from the hippies and all the civil rights movement, all the stuff that happened in the 60s and 70s. And then there was this pendulum swing back. But I think another part of it, a lot of men who've grown up um, haven't been had an experience where they've been tested. To be honest with you, right? And like we don't have rituals for manhood. We don't have some of the things that came in earlier generations in life around. Um, I think of the people who went to world wars. I think of the people who had to like pioneer across the United States. I think of like that type of thing. Like my even like my grandfather's generation, you know, grew up in incredible, uh, like the house, the environment, like what they lived with was so little. So there was like tests of manhood, and I feel like Hollywood began to take over and began to perpetuate the like the Uber man, like the man that's more than men, because
Well, I
there
think
was
it goes
something
back
that
even
was
further.
missing, right?
No,
But
no. I think it goes back even further because before I even started with the Hollywood movies and all that as I was a kid, I remember just reading comic books,
yeah,
right? And if you ever looked at a comic book, um, somebody's just begging for a roid test, right? Both
hmm
men and women in those comic books. Um, and as far as rituals, I think we do have rituals. They're just one sided. They're lopsided.
how so?
You know, we have bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, and we have confirmations, and we have the religious rituals, right? Go forth, you're now free to marry, procreate, whatnot.
Yeah,
And you know, some of us don't get to participate in that, and that's fine. I got to participate in a few of those, and I'll tell you now, I wasn't any better for it. For me, the rituals that I see is when a young man reaches about 17, 18, 19. The
hmm
biggest ritual that I've seen is that indoctrination into the military.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
And what the military does, and they do it very well, is they try to strip the ego. And once that ego has been stripped and everybody looks the same and everybody smells the same and everybody does everything the same, now they indoctrinate a unity of sorts. I wasn't a Marine, but I know the Marine Corps is like a really good example for that.
hmm
These guys, um, and rightfully so, will die for each other. Right? This is what they're being trained to do, and there is no such thing as a former Marine. You're a Marine for
hmm
life. I
Forever.
don't care if you're 110 years old. I've seen these guys at the VA. They are still Marines.
Yeah,
You know, and it's they have that indoctrination into it. I think the issue lies is there is no indoctrination out of it, right?
agreed. Yeah, yeah,
No,
yeah.
no, no, nobody. Maybe the military is doing a better job now. I don't know. I got out a while ago, but when I got processed out, it was just okay. Go take a physical. Make sure that everything's still kind of functioning the way it's supposed to. All right, you're ready to go. There was no okay. So you've been gone from the real world for a couple of years, and this is how normal people interact with each other,
hmm
and this is how normal people don't scare other people away,
hmm
and this is how normal people are not intimidating or aggressive towards others,
hmm
right? I think that's where it's missing. And I find that a lot of us that are still looking for that integration, if you would, we end up in jobs as first responders, police
hmm
officers, firemen, all this other stuff, and it kind of just keeps the ball rolling. So now you have trauma, and you add more trauma on top of that, and then you sprinkle a little bit more trauma on it, and then trauma. So maybe it's because some of my family members went out to become police officers, and a lot of my Navy friends went out and became police officers. It's there's a comfort in knowing that all the things that you do, you are justifying them for a reason.
hmm
So it's easier to deny,
hmm
right? I'm paranoid. Well, of course I'm paranoid. I'm a police officer. Everybody's always doing something. You justify it, right?
I see what you're
Now
saying.
that
So you go into an environment. So this is another facet of it. So you step into a work environment where it's justifiable, and then thus you don't have to look at. So you're
You don't have to look at yourself in the mirror going, I'm a little fucked.
mm,
You justify it.
mm.
Where other people like me who for whatever decided to go into teaching, some of those, yeah, some of those symptoms aren't as
They stand
justifiable.
out way
They
more.
oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. You, I mean, there's so many people outside of even people in the military who have different types of trauma, even PTSD, etc. But uh, for like the general population, if you will, like
yeah,
the symptoms of it, the things that um, come through in a different way or a lower grade, that just don't stand out in that way. I hadn't thought about that, but you're
yeah.
right. Like they're some of the jobs, not only are they a great use of existing skills and it's an environment that's kind of familiar anyways, um, but they provide cover, if you will, for challenges and hurts that are already there.
Yeah.
Uh, um, what about in terms of ethnicity? Like, what do you feel there in terms? Because I can speak from like an Irish background, right? Like, like seriously, like there
You
was
know,
a thing,
there's
or a Montanan, right? It's so
yeah,
it's different than ethnicity. It's a bit of culture, but it was, where you're like manly men that came from loggers, and you just, the Kellys, i.e., who my grandfather came from, they ate, they drank, and they fought, and they worked, right? And it was just like that was how they were, and so aggression was actually accepted. I think the only reason my grandfather didn't end up that way is because my grandmother would not put up with that. She literally said, all of those things that your family does, I will not put up with.
you know, I would like to blame ethnicity, but I know it's not ethnicity because I see the same things. I see the same things. Maybe it's the lumberjack culture. My grandfather, um, on my father's side, was a bit of a lumberjack there for a while. My father started, you know, going up these mountains and chopping down trees and helping, drag stuff down when he was 8 years old.
Oh, shit.
Um, yeah, I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
Manly work, manual
Yep.
labor, drinking at an early age,
Growing up early, being
growing up,
responsible,
being
often
responsible.
providing for your family in some way. So you need to do it. Yeah.
Right. And I don't really see that as ethnic. It's just what people do to survive.
Hmm.
Um, the cultural things, the whole macho culture, the whole this, oh, you're Hispanics or you're spicy, you're this, you're that. No, I don't really believe that. I just feel that's the environment that you grew up in, because I've
Hmm.
met plenty of, for lack of a better term, rednecks or Irish people that had a lot of the
Yeah.
um, same issues.
Yeah.
So I really don't believe it's an ethnic thing. Much like trauma isn't just a brown thing or a white thing or a black thing or a yellow thing. It's just a thing. Um, while in the military, we all bleed red. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yep.
it affects people differently based on their upbringing, their resilience, and how they deal with it. Some people are better at hiding it than others. I thought I was pretty damn good at hiding it until I wasn't. Denial is just that. We all go into denial. I've got some military buddies that I'm thinking of that ain't nothing wrong with them. And that's fine
Mm.
because there was nothing wrong with me there for a long time, right? Until I was ready to say, yeah, yeah. Um, so I don't know. I think Josh just had a comment there.
Yeah, he did, and I think this ties into what was just coming up for me as well. His is culture, ethnicity, etc., aren't solely to blame, but collectively they contribute to the resistance to identifying or admitting that you have an issue or could use help. And
I
like
think
the
culture
part of
definitely does.
and again, it's a lot like there can be things that provide a an excuse, a shield, etc. Like again, I'll go back to Irish because I can just talk towards it, right? Everybody I've talked to who whether they were Irish or not, identified as Irish, right? It's like, oh, well, that's why I drink, and drinking was excused, right?
Yes.
So you can use the culture as excuse. Oh, like,
Mhm.
the Irish, they have fucking tempers, right? So then,
Yeah.
okay, like, I don't
Yeah.
know that the Irish have any bigger tempers than any other culture out there, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, well, then I'm just hot headed because I'm Irish. And it
Because
becomes
I'm
this excuse that
yeah.
gives you a reason not to identify, right?
When you said I'm Irish and you're Irish and I'm Mexican and my wife's Irish and I'm Mexican, I always
Yeah.
think of a Saturday Night Live skit. It was Matt Damon and Salma Hayek, and of course, they're at the bar because he's Irish and she's
Yeah.
Mexican, right?
Yeah.
And so he's pounding beers and she's doing shots of tequila, and of course, he's fighting because he's Irish, and
Yeah.
she's starting fights because she's Mexican. And I remember that going back. It's like maybe it's because we're all Catholic.
Maybe it's because we're freaking human. Now, I
Yeah,
do believe that there are some cultures that, uh, let's say, repress anger a bit more, or don't give an excuse for it. But so it comes out in a different way, right?
yeah,
Again, every culture has like a different flavor, a different way of programming people, like as you like begin to grow up, and that affects you.
sure,
Um, but I do believe that the challenge with a lot of ethnicities, cultures, again, these are all different forms of identity, is they can provide a cover, and a reason or an excuse not to look deeper. And really,
yeah.
what we're talking about is you need to look deeper. It's like, okay, Chris, do I have a temper just because I have a temper and I'm a bit hot headed? There are people who are just a bit more hot headed. Or is there something deeper that's going on? Like, am I being
It's in your
triggered about
DNA. It's in
something?
your Irish DNA, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, again, this comes down to a bit of self awareness and self reflection.
Right.
Why is my temper going off? Right? What is really happening here? And getting curious about that and tracking it
Well,
backwards.
I think that the why often brings up denial, right? You have all these excuses. Um, I don't have PTSD. I'm Irish. I don't have
Mm,
PTSD. I'm Mexican. I'm just angry. I'm always angry, right?
mm-hmm.
I noticed that that was a common theme for you and I, where a lot of our issues came out in the form of anger. And for me, there was a little bit of an awareness and a lot of denial, right?
Mm.
I remember coming home and going, I think I might be a little bit fucked.
Okay.
Right, just because the way people would react around me, and and
Yeah.
and I remember a time in my life where people weren't scared of me, but somehow I was doing something unconsciously that I was staring people down
Mm-hmm.
and just I'm a bigger dude, and I've always been aware of that. And before, I always used to try and make myself just a little smaller, just
Mm-hmm.
scrap, kind of like hunch over a little bit, just so
Yeah.
that I wouldn't seem as intimidating. I always had that in the back of my head. I don't want to feel intimidated. I don't want to be intimidating unless I want you to be intimidated.
Mm.
And when I came back, um, I wasn't aware I was being intimidating. Till like I shared on episode 1, till a friend of mine pointed it out. It's like, oh, you're actually not that scary. You're a pretty nice guy. When I first met you, it was kind of like, whoa. Um, but there was an awareness, and I think not all of us have that. At least don't want to admit to having that little bit of an awareness. And I think that was my saving grace. That was that little, like you said, you quoted Kurt Vonnegut. Is that who you quoted?
Mm-hmm.
A crack in the darkness where the light might be able to seep through.
Yeah.
I think that little bit of awareness was my crack,
Mm. Yeah.
where
Yes.
I,
Yes.
I felt I was a little bit off. A couple of people made comments about me being a little bit off, and so it's kind of like, oh, okay, I need to start coming off a little bit nicer, right? Because otherwise, even though I'm antisocial, I don't want people to fear me. I want to be
Mm.
able to at least be sociable in social settings. Um, and the people that really knew me, I really had to put on the mask
Mm,
and limit my time with those people because I felt that they had known me before, that they could see through it. So I could hold on to this persona of
hmm.
normalcy just long enough to to make them feel everything was okay.
So was that easier to do um, when you were around like other people who were like you'd been in the military with, or like other people? So not the people who knew you before who might be able to like see through, but the people who've just known you as military, or other people who had like the same hurts and challenges. Was it easier to um, not have to mask it up? Was it
I
easier to be masked? I don't know.
I
Like,
I had a buddy of mine that came down to visit me while I was in college. He stayed for a couple of weeks. He was trying to decide if he was going to stay in this state or if he was going to move on to California. He decided to move on to California.
okay.
But being around other military allowed me to relax a little bit,
Hmm.
especially at the beginning. I didn't feel like I had to watch over my shoulder constantly because there was two people watching over each other's shoulders.
Hmm.
Um, this guy's was so awesome. 9/11, I actually thought about going back in the service, and I remember mentioning it to him over the phone, and his immediate reaction was, "No, without fucking me, you're not." You know,
Hmm.
so
He's got your back.
he's
Yeah.
got my back.
Yeah.
So
Hmm. Yeah, I look at both the positive aspects of that. Like, again, how often in this world do we know or feel that somebody has our backs? That's one of the powers of those groups in the military as well.
yeah,
And simultaneously, like, who's going to be the person who shows you that blind spot of like, hey, I love you, but like there's something off here, right? Like,
I
because what I've noticed at least is like when everybody's suffering from the same thing, it's like people are less likely to admit it. It's like
oh yeah,
if I help you, if I help you see that there's something wrong, then I'm gonna have to admit that something's wrong with me, or you're gonna show me, and so it's like we're all guilty, and nobody says a fucking thing, right?
we all stuck our finger in the honey pot. Ain't nobody saying shit. Totally.
Yes.
Definitely with that guy. Definitely with that friend. George, if you're watching this, I love you, man.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, there's definitely a feeling of ease, sort
Yeah.
of. But at the same time, you don't want to discuss the things. You don't want to point out the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Everybody knows there's an elephant in the room. Everybody has the same elephant in the room.
So nobody
Um,
wants to point it out because everybody's got the same one.
right, right. And sometimes you see people with a bigger elephant, and you're like, shit, man, that guy's fucked. I'm fine.
But me, thank God, I'm okay.
Hey, I'm okay. Shit, look at that guy.
For me, this played out a little differently, right? So, and the stuff that I was going through, it was in a weird place where I was both working at a technology startup, right? That was
Mhm,
very high pressure, get things done, etc. And I was going to college again for like theater arts,
mhm.
right? And I didn't feel like anybody in either of those realms like really could get it. Like I just didn't I didn't feel. I felt like fit, but I didn't fully fit with either of the groups, and so I just kind of like kept stuff to myself a lot. But um, for me, I think that made it easier to keep on the mask. But where that became challenging in terms of like identity, right? So like we can have this identity of who we think we are, who we think others believe that we are, and then we fall for that freaking trick.
Yeah.
Is people saw me as very successful, like in the startup, because I was very driven, very smart, etc. Like I had people ask me like literally like are you a genius, right? And that stroked my ego because I wanted to be the smart guy, so that stroked my ego. In the theater realm because I was going to school and everybody was poor, but I had a startup job, right, which wasn't paying a tremendous amount, but it was a good amount of money for the time. um, then I was the successful guy, right? And so I got to be either like the really, really smart guy or the successful guy. And both of those had life figured out. Both
Yeah.
of those were excelling and achieving, and people, it felt like, and I got a lot from this. My identity was stroked by this, like looked up to me.
Yeah.
And then so for me to admit that something was wrong, right? To admit that I wasn't perfect, to admit that, yeah, I mean, I've done this, but honestly, like internally, my life is crap and I don't really want to live. Um, that was a challenge, and it affected how people saw me. Like when I started riding my motorcycle into oncoming traffic and stuff, like they were like, "Oh, you're crazy and adventurous," not like you've got a fucking problem. And so I saw how the identity that others saw me with and how I wanted that identity kept me from admitting even to myself that something was wrong because I was trying to live up to something like some perfection, some ideal that didn't even exist. That I almost felt obligated to be into, but I was also choosing to be into. And that's where I think that identity can be really, really challenging. Like when people talk about ego, I don't think ego is bad, but ego in terms of being somebody who you aren't to try to satisfy people who aren't you, like that's a recipe for disaster, but can keep you from feeling what you're feeling or expressing what you're feeling in a way that allows you to get help.
I've seen that manifest itself in different ways. The people that like to buy the expensive brand cars and jewelry and whatnot, and they might be living paycheck to paycheck. But
Mhm.
I get it. You wanna present this facade of success,
Yeah.
and y- you know, two schools of thought on that. I think for me, one is fake it till you make it. It's like, okay, well, are they doing things on the back end to allow them to maybe get there? And the other thing is, um, what are you trying to cover up for?
So that right there, that's the key question,
Yeah.
right?
So,
Like, what is
um,
that? And it can come to different things. It's like, okay, well, I don't want people to see that I'm not perfect. Or it could be
right.
for me, like I'm trying to prove myself to a father figure who doesn't exist, right? I'm trying to prove my own worth.
Yeah.
I'm trying to feel like I'm enough. And admitting
I'm
that I
trying to feel
was,
like I'm enough. I think that's a big one to myself and to others.
yes. And so
Yeah.
for me to admit that I was hurt or weak or I didn't know how to do something or I couldn't handle this, well, that is in conflict with being enough and have everything figured out and being successful. And that conflict means I can't admit that. Like
Yeah.
even to myself, even when I'm going home and
Yeah.
having those hellacious nights that you just like grin,
You're
grin
so
and
you're
bear your way through.
yeah, you're supposed to be the guy that's got all the answers, right? If you spend 20 years in the military, you're the guy with the pension and the paid off house and this or that, and you're
Uh,
supposed to be okay, right?
mhm.
And nobody else lives inside your head but you.
Yes.
So maybe you're really good at hiding your trauma, but you still feel a little fucked, right? I thought I was a little, I thought I was a little fucked, and I thought I was pretty good at hiding my trauma.
Yeah.
Till I wasn't, and then I had to deal with it. um, but if for our viewers out there that you're watching, and if you can kind of identify a little bit, either yourself or somebody and you're like, well, maybe that guy over there or that person over there might be a little bit fucked, right? Try to figure out if they are or not. Not that it might do any good. I mean, not until that person can admit to themselves that they could use some help. It's not going to get any better. It really isn't.
Yeah.
This isn't something I found I could do by myself. And I'll tell you right now, it's a lot easier when you got when you got that group of people, that team, that squad, that platoon, that whatever you want to call it,
Mm,
that chosen family to help you through it. And some people don't have that, and I realize that. And there's there's other people out there that are dedicating their lives to help the rest of us, and I truly feel that. I really truly feel that.
yeah.
So
I
so
think
yeah.
this ties in a little bit. Josh just put, like, as a society, perhaps we should find new ways to give license and to encourage people with trauma and other issues to admit them and to seek help without the correlated stigmas of weakness, right? So, like, taking from that, it's just, man, it's license for us all to be human. Like,
Yeah.
regardless. So, like, let's even take like PTSD off this. Like, we're all fucking human. We've got our beautiful days where we have our stuff together. We have our challenging days where we absolutely don't. And to believe that anybody is beyond being human, is beyond having a human experience, which includes the highs and the lows. Um, I
and
think
I,
that's a disservice, right?
and I'd
That
like to touch on that a little bit too. PTSD. I know I'm military, and I know that I can identify with those group of people. But honestly, you don't have to have been in the military to suffer from post traumatic stress disorder. That may be pushing you into depression or suicidal ideation. That may be pushing you into other um, issues.
yeah,
Right? Um, People grow up with different traumas. Um, and I want to make a little bit of a statement here. I know for a fact that the LGBT community often gets shunned
mm,
from religious organizations. Not so much now.
mm-hmm.
I see some religious organizations actually accepting LGBT, but having grown up Catholic, I know that a lot of the LGBT just felt like God had closed the door on them. And that can lead to depression, suicidal ideation,
Yeah,
um, just feeling horrible about yourself because maybe your family was trying to bring you up in the church and this is like the most important thing that there could possibly be.
yeah,
And then deep down inside, you feel like the biggest loser because for whatever reason, that religion, that dogma has stigmatized the beautiful human being that you are.
yeah. So, like, stigmatized and shunned. There's a feeling of shunned, rejection, abandonment. Like, uh, we both have a friend who's experienced that, and we've gone through that to a degree with him. And I also have another friend who experienced this in a different way. It was actually in the military and being part of a group squad, and then beginning to have challenges emotionally with what was going on, and just beginning to seek for help, right? But that was seen as a weakness. And that weakness was, look, you're not going out with us. And he began to then feel shunned and abandoned by the people that he trusted and who had his back. And then he felt that nobody had his back. And then that led, for him in particular, down like a deeper spiral, right? Because now you're beginning to have challenges. Nobody has your back. You're abandoned. You're shunned. Guilt and shame come into this and play majorly. And then that just leads towards this downward spiral, which is why, going back to what Josh shared, providing an environment that has less judgment and more acceptance is key to helping people step forward, right? If you feel shame and guilt and can't share what you're going through, well, that's going to prevent you from getting out there and seeking help. But if you can actually feel some level of acceptance, some level of it's okay to be me, it's okay to feel what I'm feeling, it's okay to not be perfect, it's okay to want or seek help, like, and feel some type of support for that, like, it makes it true.
Community. Yeah.
Community. Yeah,
Community. I often feel that community is probably the best answer to a lot of our issues.
I agree.
Just somebody to lean on, to bounce things off of.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, yeah, I think we're all looking for it. Some of us felt we had some kind of it, and now we feel shunned from it or abandoned by it, or if we feel that we walked away from it, and you find yourself just feeling alone.
yeah,
And it doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't.
I agree. I think that's one of the reasons that we've seen such a rise in trauma, PTSD, all of the depression, the suicide numbers, right? Um, is that profound sense of disconnection that permeates like our world right now, especially the Western societies, but in all of them. Like it's, you really feel like you're on your own, and you can often feel that everybody is doing better than you. And then, like, combined with that, you don't have the same support structures, the same communities, the same "I've got your back. What do you need? I'm here no matter what." Um, and then, for those who've been in the military, okay, you get a taste of that. You get to live that for a while, and then you come back, and like that is just pulled away and doesn't exist. Like that, I believe, is one of the biggest contributors to why this has become more of an epidemic rather than more isolated cases that might have happened in earlier generations.
Yeah, definitely. Um, Sometimes the isolation is self-induced. For
Mm,
me, I did feel that way. Like I said, it was for me. It was difficult to wear the mask for too long, to pretend to be okay for too long. So when I came back, I moved away um, far enough so that if family members wanted to visit, they'd have to call ahead.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
that kind of a deal. Um, just because I just felt I wasn't in the best place, and trying to fake it for too long just really wore me down. It just
yeah,
it drained me. It really
hmm
did. Um, and then once you're feeling drained and you're feeling alone again, um, you're alone with your thoughts, and that can be horrible from time to time. You want to stay busy. You want to keep moving. Um, because sometimes your thoughts are just too loud.
yeah. I like my version of that was spending a lot of time in an isolated property in a city where I didn't know anybody and purposefully didn't meet anybody. Right. Um, and there were benefits to that. Like for
Yeah,
me, the benefit was I was actively seeking how to fix myself. I was actively seeking how to understand myself, and that gave me a space to do that. So that was the positive aspect of it. The challenging aspect was I also removed myself from community a lot, and I made the path of seeking help harder than it had to be. Yeah. So Josh is on point.
keeping
As
us
we're
on
going
track.
into this, yeah, um,
You might want to share
wanted
that. I don't
to
think we
take a
shared
look.
that.
I'm going to, yeah. What I wanted to do was begin to take a look at like what are the symptoms, right? Like how can you identify within yourself? How can you identify within somebody that you care about that there's potentially an issue? And I do want to say potentially. You never know what's going on in somebody's experience, but I look at it and go, if enough of these things show up, it's worth digging. Um, it's the same way that like when I have several of my close friends that say, "Hey, you should probably take a look at this." Like one person says it, I'm like, it's just one person's opinion. Multiple people say it, I'm like, oh, there's something here. So what Josh just asked was, you mentioned earlier that um, that you as an outsider might be able to spot when someone has an issue? Well, what could you maybe highlight? What sort of things to look for? I think this is a great place to start talking about symptoms and what shows up.
With the symptoms, I remember I remember telling my wife that as a veteran, we could smell our own,
Yeah.
and she pointing out, it's like you're not smelling anything. It's the PTSD you're looking at. It's like looking in a mirror. I was like, oh shit, I think you're right. So I think for those of us that have been there, whether it's depression, PTSD, or whatever trauma, um, once you've stepped a couple of paces back and can look at yourself, you start seeing it in other people, um, you know,
All over the place.
all over the place. And you're like, oh, why does everybody around me kind of messed up? Oh shit. Well, we're all dealing with issues, right? We all got our
Mhm.
deal. But I wish we had like a little top 10 signs to look for, right? Like Letterman. Um,
Number 10.
you might be a redneck if you might have
Yeah.
PTSD if.
Do you have
So
random triggers of rage?
do you get angry for no apparent reason at the drop of a pin? It's like just
Yeah.
yeah,
Because I
yeah,
think there's a difference between anger and rage for me. Like I have felt anger that was justified and was useful. It was like, okay, somebody is overstepping a boundary, and this is the energy to go, no, I'm standing up for myself.
right.
And I've had those triggers of like, fuck it, I don't care, the whole world can burn, I'm kicking down this door, right? And the latter tends to be associated with deep emotional hurts, right? Something so deep and core in a person has been touched or hit or bumped into that it is now a fight or flight experience, right?
Right.
So whenever somebody is going into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, like those things, those are often very much what you look for. Fight is
I'm not
okay.
familiar with fawn. What is fawn?
Yeah. So, fight, of course, is aggression, fight back.
Right.
Flight is I'm going to run away and get out of this situation. Again, it's for life saving stuff.
Hmm.
Freeze is literally freezing like
Yep.
a deer in the headlights, can't do anything.
Hmm.
Fawn is a newer one that's identified, but there tends to be a behavior in some people. It's like, oh, um, think about two dogs who are fighting, and then one of them becomes supplicant in order to stop the fight, and is just saying, whoa, 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 beta, 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 but um, is doing so not just to avoid the thing, but it becomes this automatic triggered response. And so you can find that there's a lot of fawning that can go on, taking
Hmm.
the blame for things that aren't your fault all the time, right?
Hmm.
Tends to be a fawning response
Okay.
um, uh, to avoid any type of conflict. Not to say that compromising, being a good person, not having a fight is an issue. It depends on what the nature of it is.
Okay. Okay. So just avoidance of of
Massive,
conflict. Of conflict.
massive avoidance. Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Where in some things you should be standing up for yourself.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So
So again, it comes down to not whether
if you
this is a conscious choice, but whether these are unconscious reactions.
right, I think of spousal abuse kind of almost. When you say that, those are the visions in my head. It's like somebody's
Mm,
getting beaten, and I say spousal abuse, but it could be a parent to a child or anything like that, or just
yeah. Yeah.
just anything for the other person to stop hitting you, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And then
Yeah,
it becomes an ingrained response, right?
yeah,
And that ingrained automatic unconscious response, that's an indicator that there's a trigger and a deep emotional hurt there.
yeah.
A lot of times depression, this fell in for me. And uh, what you said earlier resonated. Some of that was just there were emotional things that weren't being dealt with. And so like the pushing of it down would just exhaust me to the point of being depressed and feeling like there's no reason to step forward in life. The
Yeah.
constant hurting would do that. There's multiple types of depression that happen, and there's multiple reasons that depression can happen, but they tend to go along with this. And what you had said about keeping the mask up, like I can only keep the mask up for so long, and then I'm just like exhausted,
Yeah.
right? I think that becomes an indication that there's something deeper there going on that needs to be cared for, needs to be, um, you need help with,
Acknowledged.
and you deserve help with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, I'll take the next one. Number three: sleep disorders, nightmares, sleep deprivation, poor sleep quality.
Mm.
I've been guilty of two of these. I've been lucky not to remember having nightmares. But yeah, sleep deprivation or sleep quality. Um, One of the things I used to do especially when I first got back to the real world, uh, I would get up in the middle of the night for a cigarette. That was my excuse. I wasn't even that heavy of a smoker, but I'd get up in the middle of the night and just kind of walk the perimeter of my house,
Mm.
front yard, backyard, make sure everything was okay. And um, my sleep quality was never good by any standard. I was always, because of it, I was always tired during the day. I've been suffering from sleep apnea since I can remember, um, to the point where it was pointed out by some of the guys on the ship. So definitely, sleep quality can be one of those things that if you know somebody that gets up in the middle of the night every night to do whatever, um, and
Yeah.
their sleep
Not just
quality
getting
isn't.
up to pee because
Yeah,
you've gotten a bit older, but like the inability to sleep all the way through the night that's not biological, right?
right.
The getting up, I think you shared before, and correct me if I'm wrong, that getting up to have that cigarette in the middle of the night was also like, hey, I'll take a walk around the house and check
Yeah,
out the perimeter, right?
yeah. So
There
now,
were
now it wasn't a.
other behaviors that were going on.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So the excuse was, I'm going to go smoke.
Yeah.
The
The
rest
reality
of it was
was,
reality was, paranoia, doing rounds. I don't know what the hell I don't know, man. But
yeah.
um, yeah,
Yeah, for me, like falling asleep has never been a problem. Staying asleep most nights and everything else not a problem,
hmm
but my sleep quality just goes down the tubes. It's one of those things where wake up in the morning and I literally feel like I've already spent a full day and I just wish I could go back to bed. Like I'm
yeah.
exhausted when I wake up, right? Which I think ties into anxiety, emotional load, and all of those tend to try to tie into emotional hurts, challenges, trauma.
Yeah.
Um,
No, are you ready?
Isolation, we talked a little bit about
Number
uh,
four, isolation.
me and my property. But there's two versions of this, right? And one is I just want to be away from others. I don't want to deal with others. Um, The other one that I've experienced, not myself, but I witnessed in a friend of mine, was he just had that energy that exuded all the time. I remember being in a diner with him, and the energy he exuded was, "Don't fuck with me. Don't even look at me." Like he just looked angry all the time, like he was ready to snap. And I remember like the waitress would come over, and she would talk to me, but she wouldn't even really talk to him, right? And it was unconscious. He wasn't doing any of this consciously, but that behavior of it was
Don't fuck
just
with me.
saying,
Yeah.
"Don't fuck with me, get away from me." And it was fascinating because at the same time, like his experience was, um, I don't understand why people uh, don't want to spend time with me, reject me, push me away, etc. Right? So there, he wasn't even fully aware that that's how he was coming off to people.
Self perpetuating, and yeah, the awareness part. Because, like I said, I wasn't aware I was doing that to people until somebody pointed it out.
Yeah.
And I was already feeling I was a little messed up. So it's kind of like, oh, I need to work on that.
So you didn't realize that you were giving off that. Well, yeah, that makes sense. Like when I moved to New Mexico, I didn't realize I was giving off the "I'm an a-hole" attitude.
Right.
So yeah, you
Yeah.
just aren't
If
really
everybody
aware
around
of
you
it.
is an a hole, maybe you should look in the mirror, right? It's like, oh, shit. It's one of those. And the other excuse that I used for isolation was, well, I just hate people.
Hmm.
Right? It's
Yeah.
like I just hate people. I don't want
I
to be
can't. I
around
can't
them.
be around people. I'm not a people
I'm
person.
not a people person. Just
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. To to quote Clerks, I hate people, but I love gatherings. Yeah, it's just yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a difference, right? Because you also then have people who can be on the introverted extroverted scale,
Hmm.
right? And introverted people tend to want time alone to replenish and refresh, right?
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. Like that's awesome and beautiful. Again, it comes down to understanding why is this happening. So there's a certain amount of reflection and self-awareness. Am I doing this because I just need some time to recharge and then I enjoy going back out and meeting people? Or am I doing this because I can't stand to be around people because it's a challenge, because I feel like I might do something, because I have to always put on a mask and that's exhausting.
And I
Because,
think
because,
that falls into
because.
that whole antisocial behavior that's next on our list. It's like, again, you're overly aggressive and your outside appearance, much like your friend, whether realizing it or not,
Yeah.
he was coming off with this, don't fuck with me attitude, which is a little bit off putting, right? Unless you're an MMA fighter, in the ring, because most of those guys are pretty nice. Uh, yeah. Yeah. You shouldn't take that to the local diner and expect the waitress to be nice to you if you're sitting there with a scowl on your face. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and here's our favorite one: shame.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Shame's internal, right? Nobody can see shame. You definitely feel it about being a certain way. Whether it's PTSD or depression or whatnot. Um, Maybe you feel shame or guilt about having done something that was might have been perceived as wrong, at least out here. It's like all the things in the military, all the things that you do in the military are the stuff that kept you alive. But you
Mm-hmm.
do them out here, and it's kind of like, what's wrong with that guy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Much like your friend that was overly aggressive. Um, it's all perception, you know. I know for people that are LGBT, if they're still in the closet and maybe there's a stigma associated with that. Um, yeah, there's definitely a shame about trying to be who they really are, and I'm just trying to include as much as I can here. It's not just PTSD. It's not just military. It's not just first responders.
100%.
People from all walks of life deal with all of this.
Yeah.
So um, if you can't deal
Which,
with
I
it,
mean,
deal with it.
there is a commonality in how we're all connected, if you want to
Yes,
like look at it that way.
yes, yes,
Yeah. I,
definitely.
I remember hearing this definition of guilt versus shame. Um, like guilt is feeling like I've done something wrong. Shame is feeling like I am wrong, right? It's a very deep personification of that
Yeah,
wrongness. And I think personally, in my experience, because I definitely experienced it around the suicidal ideation, around depression. Um, I think it's one of the most, if not the most corrosive experience that we can have, because not only do you feel like you are wrong, not only did I feel like I was wrong, but then that feeling of wrongness is I'm allowing it and it perpetuates the keeping other people at a distance, which then makes me just feel more alone, more wrong, more shameful. And it just seems to add into itself in this downward spiral that just never ends.
yeah.
Yeah.
Number 6 on our list: destructive or reckless behavior.
Reckless behavior.
Reckless.
Right. I used to
Um,
tell stories about some of this stuff with almost a pride. Like one of them was riding a motorcycle, and over the course of a few miles, a police officer was following me, and he chalked up like 6 different things that I had done, including reckless driving, because I decided to ride my motorcycle against oncoming traffic on a one-way road. Um, and I would say it with a certain pride because, yeah, I'm a man, I don't care. Like there was a bit of that, but the truth of it was just destructive. I had stopped caring about my own life, not quite to the point where I wanted to end it, but to the point where, eh, if I hit a
Somebody did
car,
you
who
the favor.
cared?
Yeah,
If so, yeah, yeah. If somebody did me the favor, I wasn't going to worry about it,
yeah,
right? And there are, it comes in so many different permutations of what that destructive behavior can be. It doesn't have to be that extreme, but that can definitely show up. Essentially, comes down to no longer valuing your life or your being, right? Like that's what it
yeah.
comes down to.
And it doesn't have to be that extreme. It could also be neglect. Somebody that stops bathing or brushing their teeth or just
Yeah,
doing their laundry, caring all the little things that just
yeah,
we take for granted, and somebody just can't bring themselves to even do that anymore. That's definitely a sign.
yeah,
Um, which leads us to suicidal ideation.
yeah.
Um, everybody says, we joke about it, but there's always a little bit of truth in jest. You know, um, if somebody starts giving away some of their stuff, you're like,
Mm,
or making a list of who gets what in case something happened. Um, that's a red flag.
yeah,
That's definitely a red flag. Talk to that
yeah.
person.
And the joking about it, like you can, at least I can. Maybe I'm sensitive to it now, but you can tell when somebody jokes about it, and it's literally a joke and doesn't mean anything, or it's a joke that just lands, and you're like, there's something there,
Yeah,
right? Or that same joke happens over and over again. I should just kill myself.
yeah,
Well, when you hear that enough times, like, all right, what is
yeah,
there a kernel of truth behind that? Does somebody no longer care? Is that a socially acceptable way of admitting that there's a challenge, admitting that those are the thoughts that are actually going on?
right.
Yeah.
And I never thought about this, but I do remember my last tour in the Gulf. I had this weird sense that I wasn't going to make it back. And one of the things I did is I maxed out my life insurance policy um, to
Uh,
take care of my parents and my sisters.
hmm,
Um, looking back, it was just it's kind of odd, but it was a little bit of that. It was a little bit of a goodbye moment. Um, and like I said, I wasn't out there to actively do anything myself, but if it was going to happen, I wouldn't have, you know,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I get it. Again, the same thing with me and the motorcycle, right?
yeah.
If it happens, it happens.
If it happens, it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which brings us to a point you might be just a little bit off. Number 8, anxiety attacks. This is something I dealt with my PTSD. Driving around certain triggers, you get these little panic attacks of sorts where you get the hyperventilation, the wanting to go and separate from everybody and just kind of go hide and just get through it. The adrenaline pumps so fast that you just start shaking. If that happens to you or you see it happen to somebody, um, that's probably a good sign that they're suffering from PTSD of some sort. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, and it can happen on like different levels and grades. Like I remember what you shared with me about some of the experiences that you had. Um, the one that you shared, I think it was episode 1, was about again having your daughter the stroller and getting the
heck out of Dodge.
heck out of Dodge. Um, uh, for me, I didn't have those experiences, but I would definitely have uh, like lower level anxiety attacks, the pressure in the chest, the not being able to fully breathe, the feeling like a bit faint, the like just like deep stress and anxiety, and not being able to release it, and sometimes that going on for hours at a time. And then I think that another version of this that our friend talked about, which I've experienced myself as well, is like the fixation of your mind. Like when you get into those like dark, spiraling, challenging thoughts, and you can't stop them. They'll just run over and over and over and over again. And no matter what you do, it can't seem like you break that loop. Um, I think that's a sign that there's something emotional that's going on that the mind's trying to figure out, but it's not a mind problem, it's an emotional thing.
Yeah,
And so it just runs and runs and runs and runs and runs and runs and runs. Sometimes you can't even sleep. It can lead towards insomnia and stuff as well.
definitely. um, Here's my favorite one, and I don't remember if I had it or not. Memory loss. Memory loss and brain fog. I have had this short-term memory loss. I've missed meetings. I've missed exits. I've forgotten where I was driving to. There's a bit of a. Sometimes it's just a fog, and I've also had like the full-blown blackout, where
Mm,
um, when I came to, I just wasn't quite sure where I was.
mm,
So if you suffer from this, it's scary as hell. I thought I was getting early onset Alzheimer's um, till I started getting help, and then thankfully was learned that it's part of the PTSD. Your brain does things to kind of protect you and protect itself, and so it shuts off other things, and we're not always aware of it, and you end up with short-term memory loss and blackouts, especially during stressful situations.
mm. Yeah. The for me, I didn't experience the blackouts, but the sense I had, which was hard for people to see from the outside, I could just like experience it within me, right? So it's maybe less identifiable for somebody on the outside, but I would just have these times where it felt like I wasn't in the driver's seat of my own life. It was almost like I was witnessing my life happen, and like my body and my mind were like walking through life doing the work, but I wasn't really engaged. Like I wasn't fully there. I felt like there was like a sheet of glass between me and what was actually going on in life. I didn't feel like I could connect with people. I didn't feel like people could connect with me. It didn't feel like even sometimes I was having a conversation with people. It was like this feeling of disassociation um, that would happen massively. And uh, when I was triggered, um, like that would come up as this automatic response, this defensiveness. And sometimes it would take hours. There have been times it would take days before I would really feel like I came back into living my life and being present, like actually being conscious, being me again. Um, a really strange feeling, but that's how it showed up in my life.
So if you feel like you're sleepwalking through life or in the back seat, or if you're just an unconscious driver and you stumbled on our show and you're going through these going, oh, that does sound a little bit like me, or
Yeah.
no, those two are fucked in the head. I'm much better than that. I've plenty of times I've done that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still something in you. Um, you may be suffering from trauma, and that's okay. There's help, right?
Yeah.
So, which brings us to our next one, and it's a little bit different because sometimes it's hard to tell. Compulsions, compulsive behavior, can lead to addictions, substance abuse, alcohol abuse, watching too much TV, watching too much porn, overeating, becoming a workaholic, becoming a gym rat because nobody can mess with you if you're just lifting weights 24/7. These are all compulsions. I often before we take too big of a dive here, I'm rewatching Dexter,
Mm.
the
Yeah.
serial killer that kills
Yep.
serial killers, right? And I remember watching it a long time ago, and just kind of identifying with him a little bit. not because I'm a serial killer, but because he had certain compulsions. Right, his just seemed to be more entertaining and on TV.
Yeah.
Um, but looking at it now from a different lens, here you had somebody that experienced very deep trauma at a very early age,
Hmm.
and he had all the same symptoms as somebody with PTSD or depression. Uh, he had something that he called his dark passenger. It's
Yeah.
like his dark self. He was antisocial. Um, he couldn't identify with others. He wasn't sure that other people could feel the same way he does, or sometimes he would not feel and wondered what really feeling looked like.
Yeah.
And so I somehow identified with all of that. Go figure, right? So,
Dude, 100%. Like, I don't think we ever talked about this. But in my more challenging times when I felt like that strong disassociation, like I've described it before, I think episode what 3 about like just being a disconnected head.
disconnected head.
Um, I literally began to uh, take um, tests for Asperger's, take tests for psychopathy, like just take like various tests because I thought like it was strange because sometimes I would feel so deeply, but other times I'd feel like I couldn't feel or relate with anybody. And I literally felt like there was uh, like I had a mental or developmental challenge that was keeping me from it. And like looking back at that, I think it's so weird because I can look at all the times in a kid that wasn't true, and but yet there was this period of my life where I literally felt like I couldn't empathize or connect with people.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, like that does relate. Funny enough. Hmm.
So we might just all be, 1 inch away from becoming serial killers ourselves.
Or
Um,
having your own television
or
show.
having our own TV show, right? Networks, if you're watching, we're available. Yeah, no, but yeah, those compulsions can lead to addictions. I know I kind of abused alcohol the first 2 years after leaving the military.
Mm,
Kind of coming to that realization, I was very lucky that I somehow became aware of things a little bit at a time, and I was like, "Oh, I got to stop doing that.
mm,
Oh, I got to stop doing that." And to my credit, I was pretty successful at it, and I that was one of the reasons where I felt that I had this PTSD thing under control. I didn't want to name it at the time, but I was like, no, 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 I can stop whenever I want. I always felt that I was under control. Um, but I realized that I did other things,
mm-hmm,
the workaholic. I had 2 jobs and went to school full time.
mm-hmm.
The eating, I'm eating fast food because I don't have time to do, anything.
Yep.
Um, distractions. I can't possibly, spend 20 minutes just me and my brain. So I have to turn on the boob tube and just watch whatever's on. I have to distract myself somewhere.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I never became a gym rat. But I do remember, just trying different sports and that kind of thing, just to occupy my time. I was really, really averse to having too much time by myself, even though I hated people.
Yeah.
It was always just those superficial social situations that I was going to without making any real connection to people that, yeah, that I was in.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I didn't abuse substances, but like the number of times I could fall down the rabbit hole of just binging Netflix for days at a time. Um,
Days.
and yeah, yeah, there were literally times when I would barely get out of bed for like 3 days, and I was just consuming, like often like Netflix or whatever else, but it was just um, keeping myself busy and keeping myself out of my body, like out of like having to feel whatever it is that was trying to come through so that I wouldn't have to feel it.
Yeah.
It was less about the thoughts. It was more about not wanting to feel things. And then, of course, workaholism came in there. There were many times I went into workaholism, which, I mean, can be applauded by our culture, right? Like the
Yeah.
hustle, 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 like workaholism. Again, none of these are necessarily bad. Like watching Netflix isn't bad. Having a beer or some drinks isn't bad. Porn doesn't have to be bad. Eating doesn't have to be bad, etc. But it's like, what is the root of it? Like, what is behind it? Are you doing it because you enjoy it? Are you doing it because it's a compulsion, because you feel like you have to, because you're doing it because there's one way or another, there's something that you're avoiding, don't want to be with, can't be with? That's where it's a real symptom that there's a problem and a challenge.
Yeah. So if you or somebody I mean, Josh just posted it. It's like how, um, as an outsider, how can you might maybe look at somebody and realize they have PTSD or trauma or whatnot? I mentioned earlier that I could smell other vets. It was the 100-yard stare, especially if they just got out. For me, that was a dead giveaway.
Yeah.
You have a certain way of looking through people instead of at them. You always want to look, to their shoulder. That eye contact becomes a fight stare if held too long. Um, that uneasiness when walking into a room, scanning the room from side to side, um, just kind of like that jerky movement, and just kind of looking around, looking around, looking around, noticing exits, that kind of thing. So if you know somebody that whenever they go to the bar, or whenever they enter a room, or whenever they come into a space, and they got that, I am here on a mission, and I am scanning the room, and I'm checking the exits, and I got this "don't fuck with me" kind of look, they might have PTSD, just a
Yeah.
scotch, right?
and
Um,
and the ones that, my life was a little different. The ones that I identify with and look for, I mean, there was definitely some obvious ones, but it was more around the disassociation, the isolation, the stopping with contact, the stop, like caring for oneself or caring about life, consuming oneself with work, media, food, whatever it was. Like, it's just the best way I can describe it is somebody who doesn't seem to really care about life and is disconnecting more and more. And it can be a challenge, right? Like, I was very, very good at wearing a mask. And so most of the people in my life never would have guessed. And most of them actually did never guess what I was going through. But I also had a habit of not spending too much time with each person, right? I wasn't living with anybody. It would become much more obvious to somebody had they been living with me at the time. Um, and so I could be happy go lucky. I could be exuberant. I could be energetic. It could be the life of the party for periods of a time, but then I would disappear. And noticing when somebody disappears and where are they, and how are they actually doing? And when you ask them how they're doing, they're like, yeah, 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 fine, fine, fine. Like, what is the energy of their answer? Um, and being willing to ask somebody, like, no, how are you really? Like, to actually give a shit and to care and to ask, and feel what they're saying back, not just their words, but like, how do they feel? What do you sense off of them when they respond? Those go a long way to identify somebody who's really going through a challenging time, who may not even want to admit it to themselves yet. Yeah.
So, just to kind of recap everything, today we just kind of went over recognizing that there may be an issue, whether it's within you or with somebody what some of those symptoms or manifestations might be for PTSD, depression, trauma, suicidal tendencies. The list just goes on. It's all trauma. And, you know, be kind if those people are still in denial. Um,
Yeah.
don't force the issue. Um, You
Show that
don't
you care.
show that you
Be
care.
interested in how they actually are. Um, give them acceptance. Give them care, rather than judgment or pushing.
Provide
Because
community for that person.
provide community. Yeah.
They will come out and express when they're ready. Um, don't force the issue. You don't want to cause something um, that you know you might regret later. Um,
How do you mean that? If you don't mind me digging into that just a little bit more, I know, and we're going to wrap up here in a moment. But
yeah, no.
what do
For
you?
example, if somebody is depressed, it might push them into suicidal ideation. If somebody has PTSD,
Mm,
somehow suicidal ideation is also part of PTSD,
mm,
or it can get to that point. You know, the puppy's not ours until we name it. And if somebody's
mm,
pointing it out to you blatantly, um, it could possibly lead to aggression. It could
mm,
possibly lead to other things. Just like I shared earlier, police officers were trained not to poke, vagrants during the Vietnam era.
mm.
Probably not a good idea to poke somebody that you feel might have PTSD. You don't know what the response is going to be.
Yeah, what I would take from that is, don't be aggressive about it,
No,
right? You're not trying to, push somebody into recognizing something that they don't want to recognize. It's never going to work.
no,
Like, people will just dig in and either lash out or just dig in and further resolve not to do it.
yeah,
Instead, um, it's care and ask and share. Hey, I've noticed that this is happening. Are you okay?
yeah,
Hey, I noticed that this is happening. Like, how are you? You can share what you notice. Again, there's a way to share with being caring and accepting, and that energy, compassion, like that energy is the energy to step forward with.
yeah. Definitely is.
Yeah.
So next week, we'll be taking a look into the steps to begin after you recognize that there might be an issue. So if you are so inclined, we would love to see you here next week. If you are so inclined, we'd love for you to join the conversation. There's a little chat option there on the YouTube. We are working on getting a phone number so that you can just give us a call, ring a ding ding. You can join the conversation with us. Okay. We would like for this to be as interactive as possible. And the only way that could happen is if you call us. We don't have your phone number. Otherwise, we'd be hitting you up. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Greatly
you.
appreciate it. Until next week, big love.
Big love. Good night.
Good night.